Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Conferencing and Collaboration Power Hour series. We are going to go ahead and get started here. Our webinar today is sponsored by Blue Jeans by Verizon. This webinar has been approved for 1 RU for CTS, CTSI, and CTSD credits. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to get those credits on your transcript. During the webinar today, all attendees will be placed on mute. The event chat icon is the speech bubble, and that's where you can communicate with all attendees. Please introduce yourself in the event chat today and let us know where you're joining us from. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. If you'd like to turn on the captions, click the CC button in the lower left-hand corner. If you have any questions, please enter those into the Q&A chat, which is going to be on the right-hand side of your screen, and the Q&A icon. We'll take audience questions throughout the presentation via text. Speakers will be responding to you in the Q&A box, as well as we'll take some questions after the presentation concludes. Again, please feel free to chat in the chat box while we're going through, as well as entering your questions in the Q&A chat. And this webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes today. If you have missed one of our other conferencing and collaboration power hours, please go to avixa.org/training section, and that's where you will be able to find other webinars that have been previously recorded. For this webinar, please allow about 5 business days for us to get this online. Today's webinar will be moderated by Pete Coman, who is the Chief Technology Officer at ETS. Satya Patti is joining us as the Senior Product Manager from Blue Jeans by Verizon, so thank you for our sponsored speaker. Melanie Coughlin with Almo and Lance McDonald with the Capital Group will also be rounding out our panel. So now at this point, I am going to be turning it over to Pete, and thank you all again so much for joining us. Take it away, Pete.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome everyone to another AVIXA Power Hour. We've got an action-packed hour ahead of us, so we're just going to jump straight into it. And Satya, I want to start with you. We just want to go back to the basics here. With everything that's happened over the past 12 months, can you help me define what a conference and collaboration space actually looks like? How do we define that?
So thank you, Pete. So it's been an interesting time. Earlier, when the conference and collaboration it had a different meaning. It used to be like a basic cases of meeting rooms where it was a closed wall with a small room, medium room, or a large room with all those panels and the lights involved, and there would be people would be sitting on a particular meeting room, and that there would be screen on the upfront, and then all the discussions would happen, and there would be cross teams that could be teams different location, and the meeting rooms would. And once the meeting ends, you go out to the meeting room. That's it. It's just for team meetings and all everything. But pandemic has taught us a huge, a different game. It's the meeting rooms meaning has changed. Like it has gone into different collaboration space. Now the meeting room has become like a different category. Like there are modular meeting rooms, exec meeting rooms, like home office. And the places of collaboration has got segmented and broken down into different places, and the equipments has also got upgraded, and the requirements of the equipment has changed. We have seen a drastic changes now, and I'm sure we are going to see a different realm of these meeting rooms as we see coming years. Collaboration and the conference room, the meaning has changed, and we see huge differences as we speak.
So what you're saying is basically we've moved from traditional type of space, 4 walls, screen on a wall, to be able to meet anytime, anywhere.
Right. Meetings everywhere is a concept that's working out. Like you could be in a office room or a holiday, beach holiday or somewhere, and you could just close your door, or even there is a no door, you just pull up a curtain and you start having a meeting. So now, like, it becomes really important for us to understand with this circumstances how effectively you are going to collaborate and communicate and make sure your meetings are as productive or as useful as you used to be. So it's definitely a challenge, but yes, interesting times are to come.
And do you think that meeting spaces, do you think the number of meeting spaces will reduce over time? Like when we're planning new workspaces, new workplaces, do you think that there'll be a requirement to actually take back some of that space and use it, maybe put more people in there or add more desks or use it for another purpose rather than a meeting space because we have this technology now?
Right, absolutely. Like the meeting spaces are going to get segmented. Like there was a customer from some of the different region. They have reached out to us that, like with a novel concept, they're breaking the meeting rooms, large meeting rooms into smaller segments, and they're introducing workspaces in between because they're reclaiming the area. They're putting some people's workspace in that, and the meeting rooms are not either. They're not used to be crowded or clustered. Like they are now modularized meeting room where like 2 to 3 chairs and effectively communication and that. And now like desktop spaces and workspaces has become now a new area of collaboration because people are not sitting closer to each other nowadays like they would be sitting far away. So that means less disturbance, more communication, and meeting rooms would be there definitely because they provide the secrecy and the privacy and of the confines. Those things would be there, but definitely the way it was used earlier is going to differ, and the requirements of setting up the meeting room will definitely is ever changing now.
Interesting. And Melanie, I mean, as we just discussed, I mean, we're able to meet anywhere, anytime, and then we're obviously transitioning, or we will be transitioning to a more of a hybrid workplace, sort of moving forward. So, with people working half their time maybe in the workplace and the other half remotely, what considerations do we need to factor in to facilitate, this new hybrid way of working? Probably, if you take yourself off mute, I think we'll.
That helps out, right?
Be able to hear you.
Okay, the joys of working from home, right?
Exactly.
So I think what's interesting is that we've all come to the realization that there is no big rush to get back to the office, right? We thought maybe towards the end of last year to the beginning of this year, we were going to be able to see more of us being able to be in the office and realizing that there's social distancing guidelines even when we do get back to the office. What does that mean? It means all of us can't be in the office at the same time if we're abiding by social distancing guidelines in smaller spaces, right? So the mix of the home and office space and collaboration has become paramount to have productivity, right? So in office and remote team members need to be connected, and we need to be banded together in how do we do that, and how is the equipment adaptable, and is it easy, and it must service all of our team members. So from that perspective, when we're making considerations for our hybrid work environments, they need to be flexible. The peripherals in the room need to be put to good use. It needs to be inclusive of all remote participants, and what does that mean for the remote participant, and what does that end technology look to them, right? So are they making sure that they're part of it, they're inclusive, and is it agnostic, right? So we all host different types of meetings every single day, from Blue Jeans to Teams to Zoom, all of these different platforms, and how do we bring that together so everybody can utilize all of those platforms, even working with other companies that we used to go meet face to face, right? That's hybrid as well. Yeah. It's not just hybrid in our own offices, but talking with the companies and the customers that we're working from. So the big consideration is making sure it's inclusive and intuitive for everybody.
Excellent. I want to come back to you a little bit later in the hour. I want to ask you about, you mentioned about bringing all these different platforms together. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, not now, but I'll come back to you later on that, and we'll dive a little bit sort of deeper into that. Lance, you're on the client side of the fence. It'd be really good to get your perspective on, with all the conferencing collaboration solutions, hardware that we're deploying, what conversations need to take place, like well before these systems actually get deployed? What conversations are you having with your people?
Right. It's maybe the most interesting time to be in this type of work. It's so exciting, but it means that a lot of eyeballs are looking at collaboration and AV and conferencing more than before. So whenever I think about successful collaboration, conferencing, audiovisual, I see it as a Venn diagram of IT and facilities and office services from the inside. You really have to think about all of those, and conferencing capability really does live in that intersection there. And it might be equal parts all three. If you get pulled away from any one, you're going to miss the boat somehow. So those are important. And from the IT side, you've got to think about IT delivery. Who's going to really be delivering and supporting any space you've got? You got to think about your IT leadership. They're going to have to be able to sign on and understand where this is going. You have to think about security with InfoSec. That's an important one too. Added to facilities and office services, it's a long list. You got to think about HR. We're talking more about cameras and speakers and microphones in more interesting and open places than ever before, and tying into, say, free address hoteling. I mean, this is a lot to do with the real workspace that people are living in. Can't forget about legal either. If you start thinking about AI in conference rooms, like automatic transcriptions or touchless join, that's a policy decision that needs to be added to the mix. And don't forget about finance. They're important to have as a player. They can stop you faster than anyone else. And procurement, that's another one that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about HR, because I would consider that HR is, they're important to have them at the table. I mean, it sounds like we need to be a lot more inclusive of all the different stakeholders.
Right.
I mean, more so than ever before, to make sure that they're having valid input on what these spaces look like, or how we utilize these technologies.
Absolutely. Even just a cloud service that might help you with room scheduling could have information going to a cloud service. Is that sensitive or not? These are all internal conversations you have to help select what service you might go to.
Yeah.
The other thing I might add is, different, even past those different departments, inside of an organization, you may have different folks that have different views and disciplines of what video collaboration can be. And this was a surprise for me when I moved to the owner side. You'll have groups that deal with volume conferencing, handling 10,000 meetings a month, et cetera, for conferencing. But you may also have a group that does video production and creating assets. They may have a video studio somewhere. And you may have a different group that does live production, just like this webinar we're on right now. Mm-hmm. All different disciplines. They think about this kind of stuff all in very different, valid ways. And can you bring those together into similar platforms? Do you have to separate those out as different, distinct things? Where do they touch? That's a common friction point to think about.
Well, and especially more so now, like we have more devices sort of sitting on the network, or using network connectivity for transportation of audiovisual signals, or even just control. I mean, there's just so many players that need to be involved these days. It's not just it's just not a decision made by one person or one group of people within an organization.
Exactly right.
You're the senior product manager at Blue Jeans. I'm assuming that you talk directly to clients and you help them either upgrade their existing systems or deploy a new system. What kind of questions do you get asked, or what questions do you need answered to assist those clients with that process?
Yeah, so great question. So, after this pandemic situation, this is the new kind of environment, people are more bothered about making investments. So how they use the existing, whatever the investment they're going to make now, will it be valid over next 2 years? Or next 5 years, or whatever the equipments that they have invested 2 years back, are they of value nowadays? So there comes a decision about the investment, about the approach the company is going to take. What is the plan of the future? Are they planning to going for a merger, or are they planning to going for a diversification? Are they trying to acquire a new company, or are they going to move spaces from this location or to a co-working space? Those kind of decisions, or those kind of questions that we need to get the answers to help them to come up to a particular solutioning approach. So we also would need to understand like what's their business model that they're going to look for, what's their strategy. So are they going to have a collaborative or consolidated approach, or are they going to, as Lance was mentioning, like a different kind of a system for a different like production? You would have a different system, meetings you would have a different system, or all in one single platform. So all this type of questions we definitely ask the customer, paint a persona like what this kind of a person is and what is the typical type of meetings, and definitely then we would like to suggest them about this. And most of the times, believe me, the question asked one single question that they always ask: can I reuse this meeting room solution or my meeting room in next? That's the question that everyone is asking nowadays. Even they are willing to revamp the meeting rooms. They're just the thought in the mind: am I going to reuse the same space in next year, or it's going to get toned down and I'm going to move to a different place? It's a tough question for IT managers, but we are there to help them come up with a proper solution, proper plan, give them a better financing approach, and ensure that we handhold them through this transition.
But I would imagine that those kinds of questions need to be asked very, very early on, like early on in the process, in the planning process, to assist with deploying the recommended technology within that space, because you've got architectural concerns we need to sort of meet, and also building services requirements as well to support the systems.
Right, absolutely. Like before they start drilling out the holes in the wall, pulling up the wires, making the seating arrangement, or breaking the existing meeting room systems, or reusing the existing meeting room system. All those questions need to be answered just before the discussions of any meeting room vendor and the devices that they are going to. That's we need to answer that. And specifically, like nowadays, like global companies have a different requirement in different regions. From the US-based companies, there would be a different requirement for Asia Pacific or Northern European region. They have a completely different requirement because it's a law of the land that matters, and everywhere the requirement has actually changed. There, in maybe whatever the requirements are there in the United States, it's not would be there, but in other parts of the world. So we need the IT manager or this person. They need to actually take a holistic decision about what kind of a meeting room solution they would like to have, and what's the common strategy that they would like to have across all their meeting rooms.
That's a really good point you make about the trying to roll solutions out globally. I want to come back to that because I want to get Lance's perspective on that a little bit later on. But Melanie, back to you. You work closely with a lot of AV contractors here in the US. How do you define the requirements of the space, or how do you help the AV contractors define the requirements?
I'll tell you what's been very interesting is we're finding that it was how do we fix what we already have, right? How do we make what our current setup and our solutions work to be more collaborative? And we like to think, here at Alma, we like to think a little bit more about future-proofing that room, and Satya touched a bit on that, asking more questions. And it's great for the short term to be able to provide equipment to make that room work collaboratively, but also what are we going to do next year down the road? I mean, this isn't going to go away. I think this environment is going to continue, where people are now okay to work from home even when the lockdowns lift and everything's open. So we have to think about future-proofing the room, and that's when we're talking about the requirements of the space. That's what we want to talk about. Yes, what do you already have and what's already existing, and what can we put in there to make your solution work, but also ensure that it's future-proof. Maybe it does need to be a USB peripheral versus a whole network solution, or a software as a service, or something along that. But really defining and asking the questions is what we should be doing. What we recommend our integrators do, and what we should be helping them with if it's not their common practice, unified communications or solutions of that place.
You mentioned the term future-proofing, and before that you were talking about making sure that a space is adaptable and flexible. Can you give me some examples of what could be done to future-proof or make a space more flexible and adaptable?
I think the most important thing is that we have to make sure that it supports the user needs in any use case. So whatever's supporting anything that they can think of and how we can make that work. And then secondly, using any device in that kind of application. So future-proofing it for any devices, BYOD or BYOM, whichever you're choosing, and then making sure it's usable in any environment. So future-proofing is also longevity down the road, thinking about things that may come up in options that they may need. Satya also touched on a single platform versus open rooms. So really figuring more about open rooms and how that future-proofs and how it becomes more of an agnostic environment for anything that may come up.
One of the things that I would love to see here in the US is raised floors. We don't see a lot of it. I mean, we do work on projects from time to time with raised floors. It seems to be more popular in other parts of the world, but just by having a raised floor, it gives you that ability to sort of run cables more easily, for example, and make do ads moves and changes as required. So I think that from a building perspective or a design perspective would really help what we do as designers and people in the industry with creating more adaptable and flexible spaces.
Yeah, certainly the difference between having existing and new builds, right? When you're thinking about a new build or a new conference room where you're fully outfitting a conference room, that should absolutely be number one on their agenda, because that is going to future-proof it, allow the cabling to run through and be able to, you can change out anything without digging into the drywall or trying to pull cable through walls. Nobody wants to do that. It's not fun.
Satya, did you want to add something to that, to those thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, a lot of these questions come up in our discussions with customers. So one good example I can give you, there was a company which had asked us about a meeting room wherein one side was the podium where the speakers used to speak, and all the rooms were placed as attendee mode, and the camera used to be placed in the back of the meeting room so that they used to focus on the speaker. Now the thing is that the same customer has come back to us asking us that we want a solution where the speaker can be up any side of the room, and the camera could be moving from one side to another, and the wiring should be flexible so that I don't have to rip open the walls and then refix the wiring. So this led us to thinking, what kind of a meeting solution are we going to provide? Are we going to have fixed kind of a solution which gets fixed on the wall, or something which you can just plug out from one end and plug into another end and it works as it is? Those kind of the meeting solutions are the future, and I absolutely this is something which we are all thinking about. This is going to be the world. Plug out, anything happens, you plug out from one place, rip out, maybe go to another place, plug in, and it starts working. Same kind of experience, same kind of a thing, irrespective of how many people are there, 5 people, 10 people, 20, or just single person speaking. It should work the way it is. So interesting times, interesting things, but this is a lot of things to learn as well.
Yeah, I love the idea or the concept of having a totally flexible space. Admittedly, the cost of technology is coming down a lot, but in the past, to provide a totally flexible space, it's been very, very expensive. I think, with the use of AV over IP and using the network more, we do have a lot more flexibility. It's very, very modular. Still, maybe not at everyone's price point, but it'd be nice to actually be able to get there to do exactly what you said, to be able to just plug something out and plug something in. Hopefully costs keep coming down in that area so we can provide those kinds of solutions.
Yeah, one interesting thing I would like to provide is there used to be legacy systems used to have those long extenders. So you need to have big wires. You need to put long extension wire from one end of the meeting room to another meeting room. So nowadays, we have those IP-based solutions where you just plug and play the entire in the same IP network and it works. So that's an example that we are talking about.
Yeah, and I think the sooner we can get away from proprietary systems, the better it will be to give you that flexibility to be able to swap things in and out and have that interoperability between disparate systems. Lance, I want to ask you about creating proof of concept spaces. I know in the past when we've worked with our clients, it's proved to be extremely valuable to create these proof of concept spaces, so the client can actually test out or get a hands-on have a hands-on approach to what works and what doesn't for them in their spaces. Is that something that you would recommend other organizations look into, creating proof of concept spaces before they deploy new technology?
There is nothing like the real thing. Absolutely. I agree. And there's a couple reasons for it. One, just from a technical side, we as designers and owners and managers can do so much selection on paper and through applications engineers and all that good stuff. But there's almost always something in an environment that could be a gotcha, and you want to catch it in a lab best you can. So yes, sandboxing in a lab at a minimum for a lot of this interop type of work is, I think, absolutely critical. Finding space for that and time and a little bit of expense is always hard, but if you can square that away, the value will show up pretty quickly. The other two things I'll add to that, one is, depending on the size of your project, there will be a stakeholder buy-in phase of a large project, especially if we're looking into things that are more abstract in use than they used to be. A room made sense if it seats 14, it has one camera, it's got a projector, that's what it does. If you go more flexible, you kind of have to prove that out a bit. So that's going to help you with buy-in and get stakeholder engagement. And you'll probably find something that they're thinking of as a use case you may not already know, which is great. You get that good info. The last thing I'll mention too is that...
Just on that, Lance, what I've always found is that I mean, as designers and consultants, we'll design all these systems, and everyone agrees to it on paper, and then it starts to get deployed, and people walk into the room and they go, "I didn't think it would look like that," or "I didn't think it would operate like that," and therefore you're like, but you signed off on everything, right? So
it's true. As an owner, depending on the project size, we may ask for a mock-up, or we may even do an internal study. It's a really good discipline to think about. It's always worth the time. The other thing I'll mention that we know that we're really focusing on a lot, just as a general trend, is geometry. We can't get a camera behind a display, and it isn't magic yet. And it's always about that compromise and get those angles for parallax right. And when we talk flexibility, you're starting to move away from perfect. And where in that sphere of perfect versus flexible do you want to live? So you just can't replace a physical table, even a mock-up table, chairs where your camera's located, camera heights, display heights. It's really valuable work. I very much recommend it.
Yeah, so it requires a lot of coordination. I mean, you previously mentioned, first of all, you need to get that stakeholder engagement, get everyone involved, but also a lot of coordination needs to go on with the architect and the interior designer, because it needs to all fit in the space to have. Absolutely. You want to walk into a nice space, and even acoustics, for example, are so critically important.
Yes, they are. Everyone wants a glass wall, but it doesn't sound great, right? So you have to find that perfect balance.
Yeah, no, it can be tough. And in the past, what have you done? You mentioned before about finding the space to create the proof of concept spaces. How have you handled that? Because you're exactly right. I mean, on projects where I've done that, luckily they've had some space that they could actually deploy, but it does take up a lot of room. So how have you done that? Have you found disused spaces? Did you have to go outside the building to do that?
All of the above. I'd say get resourceful, because sometimes mocking up in a timely fashion is more important than in a perfect fashion. So if occasionally a partner will have a technical center that can do some prior testing or mock-ups for us, great. That could be off-site. perhaps there's a piece of somehow a piece of real estate somewhere where we can beg, borrow, steal for a certain amount of months, and that's really useful. But as one thing I've learned on the inside, space is always a challenge. If not just for mock-ups, just storing the modular furniture you may need or the extra AV cameras that you might be thinking about. It's always a challenge. Another reason to talk to facilities and office services frequently and often.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Good point. Satya, I mean, what are your thoughts on determining the right gear? So, I mean, we can do a proof of concept and we can test it out, or the client can actually test it out. But, you know, do you have any thoughts on what the right gear is and what we should be looking for?
Yeah, so depends upon the use case specifically in what sector are you in. Like these days, like your vertical sector matters. Like, are you in education, healthcare, or are you like normal meetings where you are using these meeting rooms just for meetings, or are you a design centric company where you would like to have a big whiteboard essentially in your meeting room that you would draw that. So depending upon the use case and depending upon the vertical that you are working on, the gear would be decided. And specifically, like today, like the engineering team would like to have the Scrum meetings or their dashboards or something aligned on the walls, so that your camera should be placed in such a way, right? Your camera should have that amount of wide angle, that amount of pan, tilt, and zoom, so that it covers the entire wall, the post-its on the wall, or possibly the best whiteboarding solution, so that whenever somebody stands to write, you would be able to capture these things and send it across in a seamless manner. So those specific things are there. And now after this, there's a space, like people density, number of people that are sitting in the room would be differently placed. Like they would be sitting far off. They're not sitting close to each other. So there would be your camera should have a people tracking mode. Like whoever is the active speaker should be, the camera would be focused on that, or maybe they're moving across the moving. Maybe it's a teacher. So that kind of a thing is there, like, and possibly like you would have to have right audio pods near the person who is speaking. If there's audio is that person is far enough, that specific, and there the AV integrators and all, they need to actually get into the business to understand what exactly the use case that they're looking at, what's the solution is there for the in-room meeting solution, and kind of for that. Interestingly, now those meeting rooms are also for remote participants. So one side would be participants who are in the meeting room, the other side would be of remote participants. So the IT manager also needs to take care, like what are the gears that they are providing for those remote participants. They should have a noise cancellation mic in ear. The solution should be perfect, and if they're sitting near the the SDR rate should be there, so that if they're sitting near the window, the light is not reflecting the surroundings and all. So all those things, it's use case basically, and depending upon the surroundings and all, conscious decision needs to be. And that's how you actually define right gear. So there is no right gear for everything. You need to have a right gear for every use case. Right.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that there's no one size fits all. It's a case by case basis, and you have to look at the environment and the application. And you need to take it and design it accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. That's right.
Okay. Melanie, I mean, at Elmo there, you deal with a lot of people every day. You must be seeing certain trends that are happening in the market when it comes to collaboration and conferencing systems. What are you seeing? I mean, are you seeing more of a move to USB peripherals being deployed in the market, or is it more IP based? Be curious to hear your thoughts on those trends.
Well, it's interesting because it's kind of a catch-22. There's two different options here, right? So if we're talking about the actual conference room or the collaboration side of it, I will say initially we were seeing a race to the market for the home office type things. Okay. Cameras for home, audio for home. So we saw a lot of the consumer grade product that was really being pushed out and actually created some constraints in the channel. Even including, children having to work or have school from home.
Mhm.
So there was a paradigm shift in that type of business. There was also a lot of, USB going out, right? Again, how do we immediately upgrade our rooms? How do we get the audio and video? What's the quickest PTZ camera we can get in there without asking the questions about when we're talking about future proofing? But taking the next step, the trending that we're seeing, and even we're seeing it with our manufacturer partners, is developing full solutions, right? Something that is audio, video, whether, it's in-ceiling speakers along with, with some other conference room equipment. So the trending is becoming a little bit different, where it's becoming a little more networked, a little more in IP. There's a good mix of it. There's a combination of it, and it is really use case dependent, right? Is it a small room or big conference room? Are we upgrading or are we adding equipment? It's honestly probably an equal across the board. I'm seeing equal asks for simple upgrades to full solutions. It all is really dependent upon what the use case is going to be for that specific room or that space, or what that space is being transformed into.
So what I'm hearing, or what I think I'm hearing, is a smaller space is more likely to be USB-based devices, where a larger room may have a tendency to go more IP.
I would say that, but we're also seeing some USB being brought through a DSP, right? So we're seeing that kind of happen as well. It's really a combination, and budget seems to be a big problem, because nobody expected to have to do these upgrades, right, at this current time. So right now it's the simple fix versus the full solution, maybe down the road when there's some budget available to do those types of things.
Okay, interesting. Lance, what for you, being, once again, you're on the client side of the fence here, what mix of consumer versus pro AV equipment are you seeing deployed, and how much of that is actually residing on the corporate network? I mean, are you just, obviously you probably can't go into details, but I mean, are you guys deploying like totally converged networks? And if so, what security elements need to be factored into those deployments?
Sure. So really good questions. I'll split that into two. Let's talk about selecting gear, prosumer, consumer, pro, wherever that would be. I think of those back to your disciplines that I kind of alluded to earlier about video. If you've got volume conferencing, you got video production where they're making an asset, and you've got live meeting production. And inside of your video production, and maybe even your live space, your priority kind of triangle of needs might be that you need the best quality. Your ease of use might be kind of number 2, and your reliability might be point number 3. So if you're setting up for a one-day event locally just to film some video assets, you may only need, gaff tape, lay some stuff down, get really, local, knock it out. That's great. So you can start to select a little bit more like prosumer gear there, stuff that video producers might normally bring in. But when you get to that volume conferencing, you've got to take that triangle and flip it completely. Your number one thing is reliability. Then it's ease of use. And then it's quality. And that might feel a little weird, but if you think about a meeting, if the camera goes down but you can get a phone call going, the meeting may have still happened. That would count for reliability.
Where does price come into that as well, Lance? I would have thought, like you mentioned, a large rollout deployment there. Obviously, you would need to factor the costs of those solutions.
You do. And at the end of the day, a lot of these discipline-driven decisions, you might think about volume conferencing and build-outs to be more like your standard depreciation cycle within a company. So it may need to live for 5 years, thereabouts. That'll drive you to a different, more pro decision versus, hey, can we get something spun up right now, quick as you can? That might get you closer to consumer and prosumer stuff if you're doing real flexible, quick hit things. I think that kind of helps understand what funding projections you have to think of.
Gotcha. Interesting. And what about Yeah.
Yeah, security. This
Yeah.
one's always great. It is a you gotta pick and choose. There is no perfect answer across the board. So when you're watching over a global footprint of hundreds of conference rooms, you really have to think about, going back to that reliability part, what does that mean for security? And you may think that it's great to have every device on the network to give you proactive polling, or to be able to reach out and check on a system, or it to throw you an alert if it's got an issue.
Mhm.
But everything you put onto a corporate network is going to come along with a large package of big requirements that are changing all the time.
Mhm.
All the time. And your SLAs to make a fix could be really, really tight. The more stuff you put on network, the more management you do. There's just no way around that. So from an owner side, you start to look at it and go, okay, am I managing room readiness, or am I managing security vulnerability patches? And the answer sometimes is, don't put it on network, and old school room checks, and put your people on it and really make sure the room is running. Build systems that are rock solid, that don't need much connectivity to the outside world, or maybe even deep insight like you might want, and pick what insights you want to network very carefully, because everything you land comes along with a ton of security management.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Satya, what are you seeing in the market? I mean, what role is the IT manager playing in deploying these solutions? From what we see in the market, it's such a critical piece with more and more equipment being on the network. Are you experiencing the same kind of thing, and what can be done?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So interesting thing happened when the pandemic hit first, and there were equipments there on the offices. So a lot of the equipments were just plugged out and they were sent to people's home. So they started using the equipments which was there in a private LAN and in a secure environment, were suddenly exposed to public IPs. Like they were placed on the open Wi-Fi networks and they were started. And that's when like it led us to thinking like that the IT managers came back to us asking these questions like, how can we make this meeting room secure when they are outside our VPN, outside our network? Not all the equipments would have a secure VPN. They would not have a secure network connection. You would be having in a Wi-Fi network where your Wi-Fi might not be stable enough, or Wi-Fi might not have all this 256 encryption or WPA encryption, all those kind of a thing. In that case, the IT manager has to think twice in deciding like what's the best way, what's the meeting gear, what's the solution that I need to provide, so that the meeting has to be collaborative, meeting has to be reliable and also secure. They have to also ensure there's a SOP or an etiquette of these meetings. Like when people come into meeting, like they should have the office given gears. They should also have a protocol of like the camera should be on. Like just imagine somebody, you are presenting like next year projections in a meeting room and somebody's camera is off on the other side. It's scary. So that point of a time, your meeting room should have everything like all those SOP protocols are there. And IT manager has to rewrite a lot of rules, and they have to consider like a lot of things. Like even the normal cases of virtual background can be a security threat in some cases, because in a home situation, a home environment, when we are presenting something, people like there could be a camera just behind sometimes. So that could be we have been asked these questions. Like what if there is a camera just 1 feet or 2 feet behind that? Can they be recording our conversation? To which we normally ask no virtual meeting, like no, we have to enable a setting where there shouldn't be any kind of a virtual background. So all this kind of a manager has to think when they are actually taking meetings from offsite and onsite, and a lot of equipments to manage, and in a different network conditions, and especially make sure that not only like everybody, your company's meetings and environments are safe, but you are also ensuring the meetings are right productive as they are.
Yeah. So once again, I mean, these people, the IT managers, need to really be involved from day one, so they can have that valuable input to help the rest of the design team create a usable and secure space.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They have to be from the day one. They have to be involved in this, and they also need to know like where all these employees are, which locations they're getting located, and even like where there's
Okay.
IT managers have a very immersive role nowadays. They are considering all this.
Yeah. And so we've met with our stakeholders, we've done our proof of concept, we've decided on the solution we're going to deploy. Lance, what I would like to know is that you work for a global organization, you have offices all around the world. Does that then become the new standard globally? Do you immediately start to upgrade all your locations, or do you only apply that new standard like when a project comes up? So maybe it's a refurbishment or a new build somewhere in that location. How does the Capital Group approach this situation?
It's a tough one. It is. It takes a lot of work. The best way that we've navigated, or we think about this, and I think it is a good best practice in general, is to take on a product set mentality instead of a piece of hardware mentality. Can you devise and develop a curated set of well-known parts and pieces that you can deploy globally, that you've got manufacturers for globally, you can get in region, that you can have labor touch and actually install, and have some consistency there, and then manage your product sets. So that's a long up ramp to kind of get from a lot of custom rooms to how much can we do with the fewest amount of pieces of gear. But once you get that down, that can help start to inform that discussion with the architects about new builds or changes, which is really important. Really start to get to some consistency, and then when inevitable parts and pieces have to evolve or a part is discontinued or you have to move on, then you can manage those a little easier. I will say though that works best when you're in a hermetically sealed environment, maybe an organization that has all of its own spaces. But if you're in an organization where you're managing mergers and acquisitions and you're trying to manage 5 different standards that maybe you didn't build, how could you get there? Same kind of thing can help. But then you start to ask the question of, is it a hard push or is it a phased approach?
Yes.
And I will say it's almost always a phased approach of some variety. It's pretty rare to have a light switch where you really line everything up and then just do it quickly.
Yeah.
If nothing else, taking rooms offline is very, very difficult once you're in production in an organization. This last year, withstanding.
Yeah, that's right.
This has been an amazing time to just not be in production, which is just so odd.
A good
But
time to
even
upgrade.
and even in that window, can you really, to Melanie's point, do you have the finances and the plan to completely reinvest in AV? And the answer is almost always no. How do you phase that out then? So yeah, it's usually a phased approach, and the more you can do a product mentality and the more you can smooth those changes, the better you're going to be from an uptake and delivery perspective.
What if you get it wrong? See, some solutions.
Right.
I mean, to Satch's point before, he mentioned about maybe a particular product is better supported in one region of the world than another. What if you deploy something on a global basis and there's an issue? What do you do from there? Do you rip it out?
That's the scary, right? So for me, it's that adage of, if you've got 5 minutes to chop down a tree, spend the first 4 minutes sharpening the axe. So you kind of go back to that long list of stakeholders that you engage early and often and work on all those different factors. Because by the time you get through all those discussions, your potential solution is going to be looked at by so many people that you probably avoided a fatal misstep. But mistakes do happen. A product just doesn't do a thing that you want it to do. As an organization, you may go a certain route and the winds change and it just was the wrong play. First off, as an owner on the inside, that's a level of patience you have to just learn because it can happen.
Yes.
But remember that everything's on a depreciation cycle for technology. So you may have that problem for 3 to 7 years, depending on your organization's, depreciation cycle. And if you ask for a change, that goes back to finance to say, can we reinvest in that room? And that's a hard discussion. You'll almost always go back to what I hope is everybody's first thing, which is what's the customer experience? And if you focus on the customer experience all the time, the actual technology becomes a little less important, and what you're doing with it matters more. So if there was just a technical issue, you could usually surgically take care of that. If we got the customer experience wrong, bigger rudder to move, and it's going to take more players to help fix.
Totally agree. Yeah, no, look, totally agree with that. It's all about the customer experience or the user experience. And Melanie, what I would like to know, I mean, talking about that customer experience, one term that comes up with on the majority of our projects is how do we create a frictionless meeting environment? I mean, what technologies are you seeing out there that's helping reduce that friction when it comes to people collaborating and meeting with each other?
So just going back to what I had spoke upon earlier when we were talking about agnostic rooms, something that's agnostic because we have increasing numbers of virtual employees that don't regularly work in the same location as their teammates. So what does that mean? They have a feeling of disengagement. They may be distracted or misunderstood in their conference calls. So how do we, when we're thinking about our product subset, what is the agnostic ability of some of these products? So Lance had kind of touched on making sure everything works. Well, not everything does work. Not everybody's firmware is compatible. Not sometimes you get the audio to work and the video doesn't. So when it becomes frictionless, when you're wanting something to be frictionless, it's easy, it's simple. We know it's going to work. You're doing your research up front, as Lance has kind of noted. You're making sure that everything that they're looking to use in any use case is workable. The products that you want to choose, a lot of times being deployed over different facilities across many locations, can also become agnostic, and we're building those out. So making sure that they're all going to work, there's interoperability between the products, and that, if you need something like recording or archiving capabilities, that it's there. Or, all of these things that you may not think about as well becomes frictionless. So we're here to help them drive and make sure that we're delivering a product subset that is agnostic, that can work across any platform, across anything that we're trying to build out.
So so a question for you. If we're to create a frictionless environment, we need to be agnostic. Does that mean that the traditional conferencing hardware codec is dead? Have we moved so far away from that now, where we're totally UCC, or is that the way it's going to be? Is that going to be the way it is moving forward, or is there still a place for hardware codecs?
I think we're moving away from that. I think we're taking a turn away from that. I still feel that there is a need, that there are some solutions that we're still using that hard codec because that's the way it was built, and it still works. It works. But if we're talking about future proofing and moving towards the future, the move is going to be away from that and building out new solutions.
Okay. Satya, I'd like to know your opinion on how do we create an environment where external parties feel as included as the people within the room. I mean, once again, with everything that's happened in the last 12 months, that seems to be like a huge challenge where people feel disconnected. Do you have any thoughts on how we may be able to be more inclusive?
Yeah, nowadays, a lot of things are there, possibly the interaction, the collaboration, the chat, the integration. The meeting rooms have all these integrations of the video chat, email, and possibly the SOP. You may specifically most of the meetings nowadays, if you see the generic trend of the meeting rooms that are taken from home environment is camera off meetings. So there's a disconnect between you definitely don't know your coworkers or. In that case, the best way is an IT policy which usually can be set across. In that case is wherein you would have a collaboration with your Slack or whatever your solution that you're using, and then your screen sharing whenever you're speaking, you would be sharing some slide, you would be speaking about something. And officially, in the cases, there could be the virtual office hours, the virtual hours, or maybe the way you used to go and have hangout with people. Virtual hangout should be there. So IT policies should be there wherein you encourage those kind of a situation as an environment wherein you would have those virtual hangouts added into the meeting so that they can actually like help people to possibly meet or like discuss in the like casual environment. Also, there are some nudges that can be built on the meeting solution, wherein you would say like, hey, you have been back-to-back meeting, you have been binge meeting for the last 2 hours. Would you like to have a sip of water? Would you like to have a coffee? It's a coffee break time. We can switch off your camera till the time you grab your coffee. So it's some like small nudges can be built in, and wherever they can like those kind of a interesting feature that to build in, so that people become human again. Like we haven't been, I'm not sure, like this 12 months our meeting patterns have changed, and I don't recall like what are my meeting hours. Often I sit in meeting hours like couple of 4 hours in a stretch because sometimes it gets interesting. In that cases, this nudges and small the IT policies definitely help to bring together the environment. It will not be the same again, but definitely some environment we can build in.
Yeah. Interesting. Some interesting thoughts there. Melanie, you're effectively the glue between the manufacturers and the AV contractors. And look, there's no doubt that what's happened in the last 12 months has really accelerated the technology or the requirement to deploy this technology so we can continue to work even remotely. How do you ensure that your clients, the contractors, the AV contractors, how do you ensure that they stay up to date with all the latest technology that's coming out at such a rapid pace?
And I'll tell you what's been interesting is we kind of did our own survey in the back half of last year, beginning of this year, trying to pull some dealers about their unified communication spaces and how versed they are and how that business is going for them. So today we're in a situation where we're trying to enable our dealers to help them understand what's about to come. And if they haven't gotten on board with what hybrid meetings look like today, they need to get on board, and that they need to get on board with the equipment that goes into and being versed and learning about that. However, we have a lot of dealers that aren't necessarily versed in all things. They may be a little more IT focused, or they may be, digital signage is their only thing that they really focused on. But now, that digital signage is brought into these conference rooms, and now their clients are asking, we need help upgrading this. So from our perspective, from a distributor standpoint, we have the ability to assist them in the things that they don't have the capabilities of. So what does that mean? We have service, we have install, we have CAD design and drawing. When you're a smaller dealer that isn't capable, although Lance is well versed in all of these things, not every dealer can do those types of things, or have the manpower, or have the budgeting to afford to bring somebody on board and pay them a salary to do that. So from installation to all of those types of things, drawings, when we were talking about drawings at the beginning about the camera being here in the room and where everything needs to be situated, those are all services that we provide. So educating dealers are twofold on new product subsets that are coming out, and we leverage our account managers to do a lot of that. We also host a lot of our trainings. We also invite to our lot of trainings, and then also enabling them on things that they can't do, whether it becomes install service or even labor in those cases.
Gotcha. I think education is the key with all of this, isn't it? I mean, it's moving so quickly. We all need to stay up to date and continually educate ourselves. Look, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I do apologize. We didn't get a chance to go through all the questions, but I would really love to thank Satya, Melanie, and Lance for your time today, for being on the panel. You guys were fantastic. And I'll throw it back over to Lauren at AVIXA.
Thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you adding your take on this topic. It was really full of information. So thank you all for sharing. Again, a couple of final words. This recording will be available on avixa.org within about 5 business days. Your RU credits will be applied to your transcript within 5 to 7 business days. And if you have any questions, please contact webinars@avixa.org for questions. Don't miss the next webinar. It is going to be May 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Our topic is going to be where the workforce is now. And to register for that, just go to avixa.org/events. And thank you all very much again for your time and contributions today. And a special thank you to Blue Jeans for making this webinar possible for us. And we will see you guys next month. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.